Welcome back to Fitness or Fiction. Today, we're going to talk about stress because I'd be stressed if my biceps aren't big enough. Cue the intro.
Okay, so stress, this is one of those things that everybody talks about, and I think that it's worth discussing.
I think everybody's perception, for the most part, I speak for everybody listening to the podcast.
I love it when you speak for everybody. It's my favorite.
Most people perceive stress as a negative thing, and stress is bad, and we need to try to keep it as low as possible, and don't be stressed out. And even your perception of stress can affect how your body actually tolerates and handles and processes stress.
Yeah, let's start with, that's a lot of stuff. That's a matzo ball there. Let's start out with something simple.
Okay.
Do you think that most people believe stress to be good or bad?
Bad.
Yeah, I would say that the overwhelming majority look at stress as like, you'll hear like every day, like, stress kills, man.
Well, they'd be like, oh, I'm so stressed out today. And it's a negative thing. Nobody's like, oh man, Curtis, how was your day? Stressful. Awesome.
Yeah, so the question comes, and it comes pretty clearly in literature. There's a lot more stuff that's come out, and it seems to me like there's surmounting evidence that the way that you look at what you're going through actually impacts the result on your body and your physical being.
Yeah.
So there's a variety of studies they've done. They had one where they specifically created kind of a placebo for people, where they took 100 people and they put them through the whole, okay, this is going to be really stressful, and stress is bad for you, whatever. And they basically gave them a negative narrative. And then there was another one where they said, yeah, this is going to be really hard, but it's going to be good for you. Here's all the reasons why, whatever. And the actual outcomes, as far as how people felt after the experience, was like markedly different.
Based on, if you were told it's going to be negative, at the end of it, you felt beat up and negative.
But it was the same experience for both of them.
Yeah, it was the same experience, but like the outcome after the math, if you told that it was going to be good for you, you come out of it. Like exercise is a stress. It's a stressor on the body.
Of course.
So after an exercise, most people normally feel better, even though they stress the body out.
Well, you can go one step further. If somebody looks at exercise as a exasperating factor for injuries and pain and whatever else, it's much more likely to be that. It just is. And there's research that a neuroscientist referenced recently that they took a group of people and put them in a circumstance from 20 years previous. So they dressed them more similar. They had kind of friends around. They changed their surroundings to be more like it was 20 years ago and whatever else. And they would have to talk like they were young and act like they were in that sort of phase. And they noticed like changes in blood pressure, like positive changes in blood pressure and like health markers, just by them trying to live as though they were younger.
Interesting.
Like submerging them in youthful sort of rhetoric.
It's so weird, like the power of the brain, right? Even like with injury per se, like when I was injured in my low back, I didn't want to do anything. I was like, oh, even if you go see a doctor, they're like, oh, just stay off it. Oh, that hurts. Don't do it. Just stay off it. Leave it alone.
Gotta be careful. Stay
You
away
develop like this neurological pathway that it's like, I have to be careful because this is going to hurt and it's going to be dangerous. And then you start favoring it. And then even that extra favoring of like, oh, like I got to be careful. That can cause a problem because you can run out of position even. Like if you're doing a deadlift and you start to get a little twinge or a little tweak and something feels a little funny and you run away from it, you shift position, then you actually make it worse.
Yeah. So the connection between your physical body and your thoughts is significant. And I was explaining this to my son last night because he had knee pain. And he just gets growing pains like I used to when I was a little guy. And he actually called for daddy. And the boys don't usually ask for daddy when they need comfort. But they do call for me when they have muscle and joint pain now. They've kind of learned that much. So Lucas is 5, and he says, Mommy, I need daddy. So I come home from jiu-jitsu, and Sarah's like, hey, Lucas is asking for you. And I'm like, yeah, awesome. Right? Like, yeah, they need me. I'm useful. So I go into the room, and I'm like, okay, what leg? And I'm showing him how to stretch it. I gave him some pails and rails and kind of showing him what to do. And then I said, where does your knee hurt? And he's showing me like, oh, it's the actual joint itself. So I started showing him how to move his kneecap around. and it kind of tickled him. And I'm like, okay, so look, go back and forth and go up and down, boing, 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 boing. And I'm like pretending it's a banjo and whatever else. And he starts laughing. And a lot of what I'm doing with these guys is that they're legitimately dealing with leg pain. I remember that growing up. I had that, and it was bad. But I got them laughing, and I got them understanding that it's going to be okay and being less stressed about it. And when I left the room, it was all good. He went to sleep.
Yeah.
So then I started explaining to him before I left the room, I'm like, your breathing matters, Lucas, and here's why. So you have two things. You don't need to know the names, but they're called your sympathetic nervous system and your parasympathetic. Your sympathetic is fight, flight, or freeze. Most people freeze. Everyone talks about fight or flight, but most of them freeze, right? And I said, yeah, when you feel like really worked up or something dangerous is going to happen and you start feeling yourself get fired up, that's your sympathetic. Your parasympathetic, I call it your parachute. He's 5, right? Your parachute system, that's bringing you down and settling you down. And there's one connection that we can have that goes between your kind of system where your heartbeat runs, and you don't think about that, do you? He says, no. I'm like, but you can think about your breath, but it will run when you don't, right? And he says, yeah. I'm like, okay, so you can connect those two things by your breathing. So what I want you to do is I want you to do some big deep breaths with me, and I'm doing breathing with him and counting it out. So stressed him out, got him away from the stress, started getting him laughing, and then showed him, here's how you breathe, man. And I was showing him some big breaths with a little hold and some big breaths out and whatever else. And like I said, by the time I left, he was good to go, and he fell asleep.
Yeah, I actually love that description, just to paraphrase what you said, because you told me this. We talked about this a while ago, a couple years ago, probably during COVID. I was reading a book called Breath by James Nestor.
Yeah, where you started plugging your nose when you sleep and stuff.
Yeah, I was doing some weird stuff.
Or no, taping your mouth shut.
I was taping my mouth shut and doing cardio while watching the whole Marvel cinematic adventure universe.
I did that during COVID too. I did the whole Marvel universe.
But I was like, taping my mouth shut, doing cardio, doing these breathing exercises. Me and you were talking. And to paraphrase what you said, there's a lot of automatic systems in the body. Heart rate beating, stomach's digesting, liver and kidneys are processing, you're blinking, you're thinking. It's hard to control a lot of those systems though, but the breath is one that actually kind of, it's the bridge between those systems. It connects to it. You're automatically breathing, but it's one that you can kind of take control of and manually override, where it's really hard to do that with your heart, or it's hard to do that with your stomach. And that manual override allows you to take control of that system and actually like calm yourself down. With my son, he's only almost 1 year old. And if he's having a meltdown, like say if he has bad dreams and he wakes up crying and I run into the room and I grab him because that's what I do. I'm a big softie with my kid. And I start taking deep breaths with audible sighs with him to try to calm his system down. And if he's crying, I'll hold him and I'll just be like, Jackson.
Oh, yeah.
And he'll start following along. And after about 4 to 5 of those breaths, he's like ready to clock out again. Like, okay, I'm actually tired. Boom, he passes out fast.
Well, and there's two concepts there. Like one of them, like he's gonna take on some of the breathing pattern that you are. But the question would be, is it that he's following along with the breaths that's settling him down? Or is it the idea that he sees that you're relaxed and you're making a very clear display of the idea that you're not stressed and it's going to be okay, right? And so there's two different psychological impacts there I think you could talk about, but it's a really interesting concept when you start looking at this kind of bridge between the two systems. It's like, well, there's that, and that's a physical choice that you can make on how to breathe that'll impact the way that you're feeling. And then there's the other side of the way you're conceptualizing the stress itself. Right? And this is something that I'm trying to get better at. People's outcomes, even with things like cancer, tend to be better based on the way that they look at their affliction. Yeah. And this neuroscientist I was listening to, she was saying specifically that in the studies that they've done with the outcomes, where people actually outlast their prognosis, that they have this mindset that's a little bit different. And she is a big advocate of, instead of saying that you're fighting cancer, it's something you're dealing with. She's like, well, you don't want to make it any bigger and foreboding than it is. Yeah. So if you're dealing with a 5-year-old that's raging at you, do you say that you're fighting them? Yeah. Or do you say that you're dealing with them right now? Mm-hmm. And so I like the way that she talked about the way you conceptualize something can actually have impacts on the way that it affects you. Mm-hmm. And for me and what I have going on, it's a very important skill set. Because when things start happening to me that I can't control, that are really tough, It's like, well, the way that I look at it is going to impact it. And I know when I'm losing function due to heat, for example, that can get really bad. Like it can be to a level where I can't really get around anymore and stuff like that. But that is something that you could have absolute existential crisis over. Or you can be like, no, it's coming back. I'm just going to breathe through this. I'm going to get my temperature down and whatever. And emotionally, I'm not always ready to handle that. But intellectually, if I can get a handle of it, it'll impact the whole system. Like it means that doesn't mean as much to me as it could.
Yeah, the words that you use and tell yourself, even that you think matter, even as like it's silly, but people think the difference between like, oh, I've got a really busy day in front of me, or I've got like a really productive day today. Like I'm going to be very productive is much more positive outlook. I was selfishly wanted to have this conversation with you to loop in things like cold exposure, heat exposure, and stuff like that. But honestly, like my own perception of my stress has been exceptionally high, and I view it as a very, very negative thing. So I needed my mind checked by Master Howden a little bit.
You better chickadee check it, baby.
Yeah.
Well, there's one more thing to get into before we start talking about strategies to mitigate, right? And the last thing would be that the same stressor, so the way you think about it is different. The way you think about it will be different depending on whether it's voluntary or involuntary.
Yeah, if the stress is just being put on you and you have no control over it,
Totally.
versus stress like exercise that you walked into.
So picture somebody with agoraphobia. They're afraid to leave the house. They're afraid of an elevator because they feel trapped or something like this. You take somebody like that and you force them into an elevator, that's trauma.
Yeah.
You can take that same action and be like, well, can you get within 100 feet? What's the cutoff? Hey, we're at 100 feet. Nothing happened. You okay? Do you want to try 95? And you ask them to voluntarily confront that challenge. You're going to get to the point with that person where they can tolerate it. And the psychological research on that is really interesting because they thought originally that what they did is they ended the fear, but they didn't. What actually happened is you made that person more brave, which is a really interesting concept. I've heard Peterson talk about this before. And the idea on that is when somebody voluntarily takes on a task that they're afraid of or that they find stressful, to be on brand here, the outcomes are far different than if it's forced. So even with kids, if you can get them to voluntarily take on that stressor, it can become a very positive thing because cold exposure. You're voluntarily taking on a stressor that's, in my opinion, zero fun. I find it totally miserable. Totally miserable. I don't like it, right? But by voluntarily taking that on, I'm actually getting better at dealing with it. Mm-hmm. And this is, like it overlaps. Again, this is physical ability to handle cold versus like the way that I look at it. And I don't look at it as foreboding anymore. And I could probably go colder if I wanted. But when it comes to stress, the way that you're conceptualizing whether that's positive or negative is important. Also, looking at it as I get to instead of I have to. Like on a busy day idea, for me, my days have been absurd recently. Like boom, 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 back to back, right? And what I'm trying to get across for myself is, man, what a blessing. Like I needed to be busy. When I left my previous job, I needed to be busy to make sure I still had a career. Yeah. And now I am, and that's good, right? So your monologue matters. Also, is this voluntary? So is it good or bad? Is it something I've chosen or is it something I'm stuck in? I think that in the world today, in my experience, there's a lot of people that feel really stuck. I hear that word often. Do you hear that word? People say, well, I just feel stuck.
Yeah.
I'm stuck doing this. I'm stuck here. I'm stuck there. It's like, listen, even if that's the case, how can you choose to enter that stress? And I'm not saying I'm perfect at this by any stretch. This is something I'm working through, which is why it's a discussion. But I feel like when I'm winning at that game, and I don't always, but when I'm winning at that game and I have, okay, A, this is voluntary, B, it's a good thing, and C, I'm lucky to be here and here's how I'm going to make the best of it, I find that my days go better, man.
It's really hard for people to have that mentality. Speaking of like having a busy day or productive day, if you want to be Mr. Optimistic, I think people take for granted an average day. And I don't know if we talked about that recently, but like an average day is actually, in my opinion, some of the best days. If I get to wake up in the morning like this morning and eat bacon, eggs, and toast with my wife and my child, and have a calm, like, whole hour to just eat breakfast and enjoy each other's company, and then train some clients, do some computer work, and then hang out with my son at nighttime. That's kind of what I would call an average day, but man, I'm going to miss those days when I don't get the opportunity to have them anymore.
That is the breadth of life. That is the majority of your life, the highest points that you're going to miss. I think that people look at the bookends too much. So go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, it's like if I'm like 80 years old and say I outlive my wife, I'm not going to miss the vacation in Fiji that we had together. I'm going to miss having breakfast on the patio with her, or going for just walks in the park or around the neighborhood and chit-chatting. Like the basics, the bare necessities is what you're going to miss.
They asked Johnny Cash if he could have just, an extra day with his wife, what he would do. And he was like, I'd go for coffee with her.
Yeah.
It's like, we did talk about this recently, and sometimes the novel experiences are bad. It's like, today was not a normal day. I got a horrible diagnosis, right? Like, on that day, I talked to you about that. You almost put me in tears, you jerk. But the idea was, some of those days that are not the normal day are going to be bad too.
Yeah.
And for me, the best days are some of the days where we just, me and the boys were at home with Sarah. We had some time. We sat down and watched a movie together and ate popcorn. I still remember when I was in grade 6 and we would watch TGIF with my family. Mm-hmm. We'd get pizza and we'd watch TGIF. I don't even know how many times we did it, but for me, that was something I could look forward to all week, and I still think about it. I'm just 40 basic. Damn years old.
Yeah.
And we're talking about when I was in grade 6.
Yeah.
Right? So that's another thing to just look at and be like, you know what? Today is an ordinary day, which isn't to be undermined. Yeah. This is something that, lucky us.
I'm not trying to be preachy, because honestly, I wanted to talk about this because I actually think I'm in the worst category of mindset. Because I work really hard and I execute a lot of tasks, and I will grind through just tasks. Like, I'm just a worker bee, right? But it becomes exhausting and fatiguing, and it's hard to have an optimistic outlook on everything. Like, I can preach an optimistic outlook to people, but it doesn't mean I always have one. For example, if I was talking to somebody like, oh man, my tire blew out on Deerfoot, and like, oh my God, are you okay? Well, you can have an outlook of like, oh man, it was the worst day. Like, my tire blew out and it was so stressful, and I had to fix the car and get the tire and pay $100. But on the flip side, you didn't get mutilated or in like a crazy car accident. You could be like, oh man, I had a wild day, Curtis. Well, what happened? Oh, I blew my tire out on Deerfoot. Nothing happened though. Literally, the tire just blew out. I just pulled over the side of the road. Perfectly safe. Everything was gravy.
Dude, if I could pay $100 again to not get named, yeah. I would do it.
Yeah.
Like, gladly, right?
So that's an extreme example, but man, it's hard to have that in the more mundane aspects of life.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I people would think that I'm the super optimistic guy, and I typically am. Like, I believe that one of my blessings in life is joy. I'm just a happy guy. I feel happy most times, and I look on the positive side of things almost like to a fault sometimes. But that doesn't mean that I always feel that way. But I do notice when things are the hardest for me, it's when I'm having a hard time with my regular outlook. Like, when I talk about normal's good, like, for me, I'm very lucky with the idea that usually when I look forward to the day, I'm feeling happy about it.
Yeah.
And that's not anything that I do special. That's just like my set point, right? But on the days that I have a hard time, that's when that starts waning. So when I talk about this, again, very similar to you, I'm not, well, you have to be this way or you have to be that way. I feel best when I'm on top of, is more what I'm trying to get across.
I think a good caveat to this episode, before we start talking about ways to maybe mitigate excess negative stress. No, I lost it. Carry on.
Okay. Well, let's just move straight on into things that we can do and that we know help. So when it comes to stress, things that you can do, I think in our culture at large, prioritizing recovery is a hard thing.
Yeah, we got the hustle culture.
Yeah. I think an easy place to start is just talking about hot and cold therapy.
Yeah, and we just had our cold therapy, cold exposure episode. We can talk about that.
So for me, cold therapy is miserable. It is. but my energy for the rest of the day and my outlook tends to be very good.
And when we talk about this, like this episode is about stress. Cold therapy is a stress
That's right.
that you voluntarily choose to do.
There's a lot of things that I would choose to do over sitting in cold water.
Yeah.
So like getting that out of the way is like, well, everything doesn't, like it's an anchor. It lets you know that everything else is not that bad.
Yeah.
Right? So there's that. For me, I would choose heat therapy every time if I was looking to kind of chill out and actually just feel good.
And heat is a stressor on the body too, but it just kind of feels more comfortable than cold.
Oh, it's just so cozy.
It just feels cozy to a point. How is your cold exposure going? Are you still...
Yeah, I'm still getting after it.
15 minutes a week?
Yeah. Well, yeah, 6 minutes at a time. So
Yeah.
yeah, ends up being 18, but it's miserable for me. I don't like it, especially because I'm doing it first thing in the morning. When I get out of bed, like I often get out of bed and feel a little bit cold anyways because I was so kind of cozy in bed.
Yeah.
So when I get out of bed into a cold tub, that's miserable. And I got to get up before the rest of the family's up if I'm going to do that, because once the kids are up, it's go time.
I hate the amount of resistance I feel towards the cold tub because I've done it twice now, and both times the amount of resistance and hesitation and procrastination to do it has been, we're not talking like insane, but like 15 minutes, you can dodge a cold tub for 15 minutes, either playing with the kids or jumping on your phone or whatever. Like I can ignore it rather than just be like, run it, get in it.
Yeah, push the snooze.
And yeah,
Easy.
so like the resistance I'm experiencing, I'm like, man, like especially because my self-talk towards myself is a person of discipline and a person who can execute on tasks. I get things done. That's how I like to talk about myself, which is good self-talk. But not when it comes to a cold tub, Curtis.
Cold tub is miserable, man. But I will tell you, if I had my choice every time, I would choose like the sauna blankets that we got from
Hydragun.
Hydragun. Those Hydragun blankets are like, they're unreal. Fold it out and give her, and it's like, you're cozy, you're warm, it's easy to stay there. You could be like, yeah, I'm going to do another 15 minutes. The cold tub, no, I wouldn't do that.
So we've had the Hydragun blankets for a couple months now. What's is yours still holding up? Is it good quality? Is it...
It looks the same as when I got it.
Did you break it?
I haven't broken it, no. I actually just leave it plugged in.
Still
to the
gets
wall.
as hot as... still the heat is still consistent?
The same, yeah. I actually just leave the plugged into the wall, and I just like bring the blanket over and hook it up.
Yeah.
So I don't need to mess around as much. But
how often are you jumping into it?
Like once or twice a week.
Yeah.
Like I don't really overdo it. I ride my bike every night.
Mm-hmm.
And I try to ride my bike every night for like 20 minutes. So sometimes after I get off of there, I'm like, I don't want to be any warmer.
Yeah.
Because that does stuff to me. But
my blanket's held up really, really well. I still definitely utilize it about once or twice a week, and I use it for about 20 minutes before bed, kind of normally before a shower. But it's funny because I'll jump in it, and I've made a deal with myself. Part of negating stress, so what we're talking about, is negating excess stimulus as well, because excess stimulus is a stress on the body. Like consuming 3 hours of TikTok before bed, it's going to get you wired, and you might not sleep so well, so you might not recover that well.
Yeah.
So too much video games before bed, or too much TV, or whatever the case may be. So part of me for negating stress is trying to reduce stimulus. In order to do that, I'll jump in the Hydragun blanket. And I told myself 20 minutes is a long time for me to meditate. 10 minutes is a lifetime. And when I do it, I'll try to tell myself I've got to do a 10-minute meditation in the sauna blanket where I'm just kind of enjoying the heat. It's a cozy buildup of heat. Like it's not bad when you jump in the first 10 minutes, but I find after 15 minutes that sauna blanket's starting to get hot. Like not uncomfortably so, but like you're starting to sweat and be like, okay, I could do for getting out of this thing now. I'm warm enough now.
I kind of like that about it though. Like usually when you go into a sauna, when you first get in there, you're like, oh man, this is a bit much.
Yeah.
Like I really like that it ramps it up. And then, the thing I've been surprised with is the idea that the cleaning aspect. I thought it would get real stanky and stuff like that, but like I wear clothes in it, so I don't need to clean it that much, but I wiped it off with like a diaper wipe after I was done.
Yeah.
Because we have those all over the place with our kids.
Yeah, easy work.
Easy work. But
so I jump into it for 10-minute meditation, and then the last 10 minutes, when it starts getting a little bit hotter, that's when I'll like opt in for like a little bit of a Netflix show or something. And after 20 minutes, I'm so like fatigued and tired. I have like a ritual where I'll pour a lemon ginger shot with a little bit of Himalayan salt and then like a glass of water. And then when I get out of the sauna blanket, slam that shot, slam the water, and then I go and jump in a shower. But I'm so tired out. Like that sauna makes me so tired. When I get out of it, I like just want to go and like jump straight into bed, but I try to jump in the shower. And the sauna, like the shower kind of perks me up a little bit before bed, but normally I sleep my best after utilization of that blanket.
Well, and that makes sense too, because your system's trying to cool you down. And you sleep better when you're colder. So there's products and mattresses built around that idea. So that makes a lot of good sense. I think that breath work and meditation or prayer actually work really, really great as far as stress goes. You can just kind of get out what you're thinking. And for me, it actually really helps if I sit down and I start writing things down.
That's an intense one. Yeah, journaling. Again, all of these things, they seem like easy. But they're easier said than done, like journaling or writing stuff down.
Journaling's tough for me because it's time consuming. So I usually just mind map. I'll just write down like point form things that I'm thinking about, things I got to do and whatever else. And getting it out just means that I don't carry it anymore.
One of the most, not messed up, I'm going to just say messed up things I've done. I got a guided journal from Amazon. It was like a men's mental health journal. And it basically gives you little prompts of things to write about, like how were you in school? Like what was your viewpoint of elementary? Were you popular? Were you unpopular? Were you nerd, jock? How did you feel? And it makes you connect with like yourself on a different level and make you think about things that you maybe haven't thought about for a while. I haven't touched that journal in like 2 years, bro. I did maybe 10 pages of that journal. And out of those 10 pages, I think 3 to 4 of those pages made me cry. Like it was just like a freaking journey to just go into this journal and write down 1 or 2 pages and be like, have a little cry and be like, oh, that sucked. But it's also that connection is good.
Yeah, I think that deep work is hard to do alone.
Super hard, yeah.
Like I believe that everybody should have somebody that's a professional to talk to. I do believe that.
Well, after I was done with that journal too, what I would do is I would give it to my wife and let her read it so she could connect with me and understand me on a little bit of a deeper level, like kind of know what my thoughts are. Because even you, like, I don't know about you, but I've had a bad habit about putting people on pedestals in my life. And I've had people put me on a pedestal and think that like I'm everything in a bag of potato chips and I'm super amazing.
All of that.
And I'm super confident. And when people put me on pedestals, it starts to make me feel, it changes the relationship a little bit.
It can be a lot of pressure to carry, right?
Yeah.
Because like at the end of the day, you're still a person. Mm-hmm. So it's like, well, maybe I got across a few things or did a few things good, but like I can't be perfect.
It's like before I got to know you better. Like obviously I still have a high level of respect for you and friendship and all that jazz. But when I first met you, you were on a pedestal for me. I was like, this guy's a superhuman.
Yeah. At the end of the day, superheroes all fall. So like
that messed me up. My best friend Kyle told me that one time because I told him I was tired of trying to be a superhero all the time. And he's like, Eric, you know superheroes die, right? And I was like, what? What?
Say what? Yeah, no, that's the thing is that like I've had a few people that I've really looked up to in my life and, you know, get that pedestal thing going. And a lot of them will disappoint you because they're still people, man. Mm. And I'm not saying that that's true of all of them, but I am saying like, that can be a really challenging thing. It can.
You know what's weird? Off topic, on topic. I don't think you've ever snapped at me before.
I don't snap very often.
I don't think I've ever really snapped at you either.
No.
Shut up, Curtis.
Yeah. You shut your mouth when you're talking to me.
I find though, like we've been friends for what, like 8 years or something like that. Normally in an 8-year friendship, you normally have one person snap.
That's true. I
guess I got to push you more.
Yeah, you got to push some buttons, baby.
So
I think that when it comes to all of that stuff, when you talk about deep work and everything, having somebody to talk to is a good thing because they make you do it.
The snapping thing, though, is relevant to this conversation because generally people will snap when they're under a lot of pressure and under excess stress and they pop.
I think that's a good expression of when you're in a situation where you've had too much. Yeah,
and if you pop, like normally if you snapped at me, chances are I wouldn't really deserve it, but chances are there would be a lot of BS going on behind the scenes too. It all builds up and adds up. Like normally when someone snaps it's over something ridiculous, like road rage. This guy cut me off, so I'm going to follow him.
Yeah, I think that expression of somebody having reached their limit.
Yeah.
And in a lot of cases, that's not directly your fault, right? It's often, like you said, people taking things out on them. That's something as a rule that I try not to do, you know, but that's a really good indicator that you've taken on too much.
Yeah.
Like if you've gotten to the point where you're becoming a tyrant, you're outside of your level or your ability to cope.
Yeah.
Right? So that would be a sign that, like, well, either A, I've been pushed into a spot that I ought not to be in, or B, I've voluntarily taken on too much. Right? And I have a habit of taking on everything. Like that's what I do. So recognizing when I've taken on too much is a challenge. My wife helps me out with that. She's like, no, that's too much. I'm like, no, it's good. She's like, no, it's too much.
Yeah.
So I think that's the other part of it. Like we've talked about some recovery systems, like using your cold exposure, your heat exposure, your breath work, your journaling. You got all of that.
How often do you haven't journaled in a while? You maybe mind mapped a little bit, but you haven't journaled per se?
No, and it's something that I want to do more of, just so I can remember the little things about my boys.
Yeah. If we check my iPad, actually, I've written specific journal entries to Jackson just so he knows how Daddy was feeling during that moment. Like I've written like journals on my iPad. Hopefully they last that long, but it's like, Jackson, you're 4 months old right now and you're sleeping and Mommy's with you right now. Daddy's out on the patio. It's summertime right now. I paint a picture like it's summertime right now. It's 21. It's perfect. Dad's out here in a t-shirt, but Dad's stressed right now. And it's not you, but just like, it's hard being a new dad. And like, I went through this. I don't expect him to read these journals entries until he's like an adult, I would say. That's what they're designed for. When he's 20 years old, I hope to be like, here, this is if you were ever curious about what Dad was thinking or how Dad felt during that time. But I don't do it nearly as much as I want to. You actively pray a little bit, though?
Yeah.
Every night kind of deal?
I try
Short
to,
and sweet?
yeah.
Short and sweet?
Depends.
It's hard to do a long prayer, I guess. I never really do anything
it really depends
really long.
how I'm feeling. Like, I pray with my kids pretty much every night. So there's that. And like, I try to do like, okay, so here's how you pray. Like you gotta, thank God for what you've got. And you gotta, talk about some things that you would like for other people. And you want to talk about like major gratitude. That's going to be a good thing. You can talk about things you're struggling with. And then you can talk about like how you want to respond for other people when they're struggling, and then talk about the impact you want to have on the world, and asking for assistance and things like that, and understanding what the next step is for you and making decisions wisely and things like this.
I never thought about the impact that I want to have, even not on the world, but just on my day, like what kind of impact I want to have on others. I've never really thought about that in the morning. I normally pray like, hope I have a good day, or I'm going to be as present as possible, but I've never thought about like just a general impact.
Yeah, like that's something I try to do with the boys often, is talk about like, please forgive me when I struggle, and please help me to forgive other people when they struggle. And that's just like a kid's version of the Lord's Prayer, right? But the idea behind it, I think for people to orient themselves in the world in the best possible way, they can understand kind of where they're coming from and what they might be dealing with, and then understand their impact on the world and what they could do, right? There's kind of this kind of foundational thing in understanding where you're at and talking about the things you struggle with. And then there's a little bit of a springboard into here's what I would like to aspire to and do for other people. Pulling yourself outside of just your struggles. When we talk about stress, I think that can be a big deal. Like just looking from other people's perspective. And when we look at happiness research, they'll talk about chunking. They'll be like, don't just volunteer like 15 minutes here and there through the week. Like have a Saturday that you spend, because it'll impact your happiness levels better, because it's actually an event that you can remember and be around long enough to be present and really experience things. And it's like, those little pieces where it's like, we went and did this, and here's how it felt, and here's where these people were at. I often talk about juxtaposing things. It's like, man, I hurt my ankle, and that really sucks. It's like, yeah, man, there's way worse out there. And if you put that beside your little bit of a painful ankle, it'll kind of help melt away some of the breadth of how big of an issue that is for you, right?
Yeah, that's a tough one, though. Not many people want to hear that, like, oh, it could be worse kind of deal like that.
No,
oh.
and it can't be imposed by other people. It needs to be, again, it's an exposure that you would choose. It's a voluntary look where it's like, hey, man, listen, it could be worse.
Yeah.
Like these people over here dealing with this. I have a client right now that they're waiting for their daughter to pass. Their daughter had a hiking accident and there was significant damage and became quadriplegic. And now has a particular type of infection that is terminal. And they're down in the States visiting their daughter for the last time. And it's like, man, knowing that's going on and thinking about what they'd be going through, it's like, today is a normal day. I'm at work. You know, I get to inspire people to change their lives positively and maybe be the reason they smile. Like, man, blessings. Like, that is a huge privilege to be in that situation versus the other. And if somebody said, hey, you need to chill out because, you know, other people are doing this, it's cliche, right? Your parents trying to get you to eat your food. It's like, well, there's kids starving in Africa. Finish your meat, right?
The classic boomer.
Yeah, it's like, shut up, boomer. But if you were to take that on and be like, okay, so the way I'm looking at this food is like it's no good, but A, I have food, and B, my parents put in the effort to go and make this for me. Mm-hmm. I think that would be, it's a very similar concept to the idea of exposing yourself to stress voluntarily versus being forced into it. It's very similar.
If we're going to tie this episode up, I don't think we've talked about the positive benefits of stress. Enlighten us.
I would say the human organism as a whole responds to stress by adapting. There's adaptation that happens as a result of stress. And this can be temperature stress. We've discussed that on the hot and the cold zones. We've talked about intellectual stress, meaning learning. We've talked, go. What do you got?
Oh, thank you, sir. I rose my hand for those who are just listening.
Yeah.
I rose it like I was in grade 2.
Was I taking over?
Hello, Curtis.
What happened there?
No, you were just saying heat, cold. What I wanted to say was I did regular cold exposure a couple of years ago where I was doing regular cold baths. I noticed a difference in wintertime that I could go and walk the dog in -30, still have my winter jacket on and my toque and whatever. Like I was still dressed for the weather, but rather than like the tense sensation of like kind of, like the shivering said, I was much more just accepting of it. You taught me that with swimming. I'm like, oh, Curtis, I hate getting water in my eyes. And you're like, dude, you just need to live in it. Like, it sucks. That's okay. Rather than just running from it. Because I was constantly just like, oh, I hate it. Oh, I hate it. Oh, I hate it. And I still hate it. I'm not going to lie. I haven't really trained it as much as I want to. But I know how to go after it if I decide to go after it again. And how to go after it is just be much more accepting of it. And that's kind of like the definition of peace, right? Being at peace whether things are good or bad.
Somebody asked me this morning what the number one most important thing to teach people about fitness is, and I told them how to suffer. I'm like, that's the number one thing you got to learn. Like, if you can go through something that's hard and uncomfortable, you actually are exposing your system to something that it can adapt to. And giving it more stimulus than the next person. Now, there's obviously an end to that. You don't want to be grinding through pain and things like that, but knowing the type of suffering you're going for and the amount that's appropriate is kind of the name of the game. So like whether it's keeping your eyes open underwater or exposing yourself to cold or whatever else, I really do think that a lot of this stuff ends up being tied back to the same concept, which is, trainability of a given thing is often figuring out that sweet spot of what it takes to make progress with that. What's the exposure that it's required? And looking at that when it comes to stress is like, well, okay, so if you expose yourself to more work stress than you're used to, and you make sure that you give yourself the appropriate recovery time and you're not overexposing yourself to that stress, not taking on too much, but you're going into that zone of proximal development where it's just a little bit beyond what you're currently capable of. Guess what happens in the future if you back that off? It feels easy.
Yeah.
So when we look at the human organism, a lot of what we do defies entropy. If we expose ourselves to stressors, we're supposed to get worse over time, but we can get better.
Yeah.
And I think that's a topic that if we lean into, we approach things in the best way that we can at the time. We take on the most that we can shoulder at the time, and we voluntarily take that load on ourselves. I think at the end of the day, that's kind of a recipe to kind of move forward. It's not that you're never going to have challenges. It's actually being okay with the challenges in some ways.
I think you'll be able to explain this better than me as well, more articulately as well. But what I'm talking about, the positive benefits of stress as well, I'm like even thinking about the physiological benefits being, back in the day, me and you were in Sunridge at our old gym, and some guys challenged us to a basketball game. And me and you dusted them. Not even going to say names, but we dusted them pretty good. And I'm not even what I would classify as a basketball player, and I don't really think you are either. We're just kind of athletic. We even play ball a little bit every now and then, but the stress of competition and knowing that we had to, like, we're trying to beat these guys and there's crap talking going on between us and stuff, which adds to it. There's an adrenaline rush, and there's a lot of physiological going ons that happen. Can you speak to that a little bit? Like, what exactly is the body doing? Like, because like your depth perception changes. Like, there's a lot of heightened, like the body heightens a lot of the applications to the body to make you perform better.
Yeah, so this is sympathetic nervous system 101. Like, your visual acuity gets better.
Granted, you don't always perform better. Some people will buckle under the pressure.
Well,
some
that's
people thrive.
flight or freeze, baby.
Yeah, so
like that. And you know, in my experience, the majority of people actually experience freeze. It's interesting that people don't mention it very often, because that's actually the majority of what I've seen. Most people freeze and go get somebody who doesn't. So there's a lot of things that can happen, but if you've voluntarily taken on a stress, it's not usually something that'll overwhelm you and cause that.
If you like walk into it head first.
That's right. So most people choose to compete in a sport. So most people in a sport are going to experience the positive impacts of the sympathetic nervous system, which is going to be like heightened visual acuity. You're going to have better reaction time. Your circulation goes up. There's all these sorts of things.
The stress kind of turns the body up a notch or a dial, if you will. Like click. Here's a little bit more juice than you'll naturally need.
Dropping out that kind of epinephrine and adrenaline, it's gonna heighten performance. It will. In fact, you'll see people lift more weight in a contest environment because there's that stress behind them. Yeah. Right?
A little bit of adrenaline rush.
It's just a matter of that the stress isn't so high that it crushes them, right? And that does happen too. But as far as, like, we talked about the adaptation for sure, but the actual, I believe that people are less likely to freeze because they've upped their level of tolerance to stress.
Yeah.
So people that have been involved, especially in combat type sports, they're much less likely to freeze, I would imagine. I don't have the data on that, but I would imagine.
I've sparred quite a bit in the past, and sparring the 100th time is significantly easier than the first time.
Yeah, it becomes normal.
Yeah, it just becomes another thing.
Yeah, like when it's time to roll in jiu-jitsu, I'm not afraid of it anymore.
Also the fear, like when I was in boxing and like Shotokan, like the fear of getting punched in the face for the first time was like scary. Like, you're going to hit my face? Like, oh my God, that's terrifying. Now, like, when I think about somebody hitting me in the face, not that it has happened in the last couple of years, it just feels like pressure. It's nothing else other than just like, boof, whoa, what happened? Like, there's pain after, maybe the next day. Yeah, but during, it's not so much. The
immediate response to that is a stress response.
And that stress response so almost shuts down those signals for you so you can perform.
Yeah, that's right.
Boof.
And the more engaged you are in that in the past, the more experience you have with that stressor, the better you're going to do with it.
That's what it sounds like too when you get punched in the face. Boof.
Yeah.
That's what you hear, right?
Yeah, man. Depends. Like, it gets more slappy the harder it is, but
it's weird though, even the outlook on it. If I throw my wife directly under the bus, so long, Diane. When Diane and I talk about pressure, I always tell her, like, my outlook towards pressure is like, I perform better under pressure. I'm like, give me a reason to perform. Give me something to shoot for. Give me a reason. And she's like, oh, I buckle under the pressure. Oh, she gets like, oh man, like test pressure and stuff. For me and you, even if it's something silly or trivial, like if I was at the bar playing pool, I'm just playing for fun. Like, I'm just like shooting pool with the boys. And then as soon as one of the guys is like, yo, next game, loser buys the table. And I'm like, oh, we're playing for something now.
Oh,
and then all of a sudden,
now it's on.
Yeah, it turned into the shark all of a sudden. But like even for us when we're out swimming, like I will dive and play. I will play way better, even though we're just playing, if it's 10 push-ups on the line. And 10 push-ups isn't even a high price for us. That's like walking 3 steps.
Yeah.
Walking 3 steps
I
is
used
harder
to
for
act
me
up
than
when I was in something kind of like the Boy Scouts called Stockade. I used to act up on purpose so I could do more push-ups. They'd be like 10 push-ups. I'd be like, yeah, no problem. One hand.
I got you.
Yeah. But no, that is a thing too. It becomes something that you crave. And for me, I'm dabbling with the idea right now of doing a bench press contest. I haven't competed in anything in a while, and my options are relatively limited on what I can compete in anymore. But having something to strive for, having a pressure behind you, I think I don't know about everybody, but I know for me, I procrastinate. The pressure needs to be high enough on the line that I actually go and sit down and do it.
Yeah.
Like when I'm teaching my lessons to the Movement Academy on Fridays, there's pressure to get that lesson done before Friday.
Yeah.
Right? And it's very rare that I do it more than a week out. Sometimes I'll be really on it and I'll get it done a few days in advance, but most of the time it's like Wednesday and Thursday, and then we're ready to teach for Friday. Mm-hmm. So there's like a given pressure that's like, okay, now it's time to turn on and get the work done. And so I do think that, when we look at stress and pressure, there's kind of this threshold where it's an absolute requirement. Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, without any pressure, I think that our culture in general looks at retirement dysfunctionally.
Most people, I feel like, is like retirement is like time to give up and like hang your hat up and do nothing.
Well, that's kind of what I'm talking about dysfunctionally. It's like, oh, I'm just going to, try to get enough money that I can sit on the beach and drink Mai Tais. It's like, well, I don't know why I said Mai Tai, a beverage of some sort. But when you look at that, it's like, so what? You're just done at that point? So like, let's say you retire at 55. Let's go ahead and say that. So your impact on the world for the rest of your life is going to just be like, I'm just looking after me. I'm just going to chill. Like, I don't know that that's the healthiest thing. And for some people that could be something they're fulfilled doing, and that's fine. I'm not judging anybody, but I think in general, the average person requires more purpose than that to be truly happy.
One of my favorite clients is Teddy. Teddy.
Oh,
Teddy's going to be
Teddy's a
70.
legend.
He's going to be 79. And I feel like I'm training a 60-year-old.
He's only 79. I thought he was in his 90s. He's old as hell.
I hope he listens to this
Yeah,
one.
me too.
Yeah, he's 79. I was training him this morning. Like, he's just moving around. Like, and honestly, every time I see Teddy, I'm like, Teddy, how you doing? He's like, oh man, I'm so busy. He's got so much to do. He's got to go. He's babysitting his daughter's dog. He's helping do the renovations there. He's renovating his house. He's got a community out in Strathmore where he goes out to this potato farm and he'll mow the lawns and like help plant potatoes. And he has like barbecues out there. And he's a tour for the Danish club where like a bunch of Danes will come from Denmark and he'll tour them around the mountains and like, yep. And he's doing this all voluntarily. He's like, I need to start charging for everything I'm doing. And I'm like, yeah, Teddy. He's like, oh, I'm going to be in the poorhouse soon if I keep doing all this stuff for free. But like, it gives him purpose. And that's why he's so damn young. And he's the only 79-year-old I personally know who will take like selfies, and he's active on social media. He's got Facebook and Instagram, and he's pumping, man. He's still living. Like, he did not quit or give up.
Well, there's a lot of research on as you back off your activity level, your life expectancy goes down.
Yeah.
And Sarah's Grandma Bethune, she was a legend, man. Like the last Christmas that she had on this earth, she cooked the dinner at her house. She was 94, right? At her own house, cooked the dinner. She was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and she knew that she was sick or something was going on. When it was time, she drove her own car to the hospice she chose and had her affairs in order. Like, gangster of a woman.
That's next level, yeah.
Holy. Gangster.
Yeah.
Right? But the thing with her was she was in her 90s, and she'd be like, I'm going to pick up the old people for church. And then we found out the old people she was picking up were in their 70s.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like the way that she looked at herself wasn't, I'm the old person. And we asked her, how old do you feel? She's like, I don't know, probably like early 40s.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, she was a midwife during World War II in downtown London. Like, she's experienced some stuff, right? But for her, she kept moving. And the way that she dealt with things was she had her purpose. She engaged and she plugged into her community, which is the only thing that we haven't talked about yet.
Yeah.
Plugging into your community when you're dealing with stress. For me, I talk things out, so being plugged into my community is a big deal because that's how I deal with stress. But I think being plugged into a meaningful community is really important. I think that's where a lot of men have a problem, because a lot of us don't talk about our emotions, and we don't have big outlets where we actually say, well, here's how things actually are. It's usually like the social media world where we're sharing the bookends and the highlights and whatever else. But
speaking of which, I shared some cool push-ups today on Instagram. Check it out.
I didn't share nothing. I haven't shared for a while.
You said you were going to share some garbage.
Garbage?
Yeah, remember you said that you're going to start sharing like the non-highlights.
Oh, I need to start doing that. I'm glad you reminded me.
Here's me drinking a cup of water. That's everything. That's the post.
Sitting in the car waiting for my kids. Yeah, I think that I need to do that. That would be actually pretty awesome. But yeah, at the end of the day, when we start talking about stress, there's a bunch of ways that we can look at it that help. But then when we look at outlets like plugging into your community, getting your exercise, having you have your cold and warm exposures, and then you have like your outlets, your specific outlets. For me, if I can sit down and learn a new piece of music, that's a good thing. I'm learning French because I find it intellectually stimulating. And for me, the next thing that I'm going to learn on the piano is the Moonlight Sonata. I've been meaning to do that for ages.
Can you give it a little hum right now? Tell me what it's like.
Boom, 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 boom. Yeah. It's a piece by Beethoven that's like really cool, and learning it's hard. But like it's an outlet for me. Learning that sort of stuff is like it's a skill that I learned a long time ago that I can still exercise, and it's plugging into something that like somebody that I used to be. Like I played in multiple bands, and I played in the University of Calgary Big Band with my tenor sax until my second year of university when I went up to U of A. So like piano and saxophone I played for a long time, and it's kind of like exercise where you don't have headspace to be thinking about other drama. You have to be present. So, yeah, I think that it really comes back to like having your outlets that you find de-stress you. You have your things that you can do physically, including exercise, and then you have like tapping into your community, and of course speaking to a professional. Like I think that's something that everybody could gain something from, because we're incredibly complex creatures. And if you think you know everything about yourself, go and chat with somebody that's trained real quick, and you'll be like, oh, I hadn't thought about that real quick,
Yeah.
So, yeah. Do you have anything else to say about stress?
Other than I'm stressed.
You stressed after that?
No, I'm not stressed after the conversation. But yeah, I think good points for everybody to think about. It seems simple when you say it, and all these things are challenging. I think for me, what I want to end on, if you're taking anything away from this podcast on how to manage your stress, this is not something that you approach these tactics, at least the ones to mitigate stress. You don't try to do it all or nothing mentality, because I'm like, man, I want to journal, and I want to do the sauna, and I want to do cold tubs, and I want to read, and I want to meditate, and I want to do breath work. If you try to do that all in one day, man, just pick one. If you can just hit one. Like for me, if I did cold tub yesterday, then tonight I'm going to read Lord of the Rings for 10 minutes.
Well, even giving yourself space to be like, today was a day that was pretty full, and like the thing that I can do to de-stress is to not worry about all the extra tasks and to just chill.
Yeah.
Like give yourself that space can be a big deal. That's a good point.
Cool. Well, like this episode, leave us a comment if you got anything to add to our stressful conversation, and we'll catch you guys on the next episode.
On the flippity flop.
Thanks for joining us this week. We appreciate your support.
If you enjoyed this episode, we'd love it if you would subscribe, follow, and throw us a like on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts.